Mabuhay! Ang akong ngalan mao si April Werle. Hi, my name is April Werle. I'm from Missoula, Montana originally. This is my work behind me here at the Missoula Art Museum, which is part of a group show called Imaging the Sacred. Where I'm at with the bodies of work that I've recently finished and the ones that I'm heading into is that I'm examining how culture is passed down generationally in the Filipino diaspora. And I think defining diaspora is important in this context, but it means the dispersion of people from their homeland, and 15% of all Filipinos are in the diaspora. That's a huge amount of people. It is culture, but it's specifically the stories that I'm interested in, how, like, for my family, culture was passed down through oral stories. And as I'm an adult and I learn more about Cebuano history and pre-colonial culture, the more I realize like how many hints in these oral stories that were passed down to me hold very important pieces of history, and I didn't know that until I started learning more about Cebuano history. These three pieces, they're an extension of a body of work that I recently finished about the Diwata deities and spirits. And so these stories are sacred to me because they, well, one of them is based on a story that my mom told me growing up about a witch that told her her future based on the moles on her face. And if you look at my mom, my little sister, and I, we all have lots of moles on our face. And then this one here in the center is based off a spiritual river where your soul waits to go to the afterlife, if you will. And then this piece is about the removal of spiritual tattoos that used to be common in my ethnic group that are no longer practiced. But what's interesting is because tattoos are becoming part of American culture, which has allowed the Filipino diaspora to bring back spiritual tattoos. And so you see a ton of Filipinos reclaiming that practice now. The most common idea culturally of the significance of hands is through manopo, or in Bisaya we say amin, which is receiving blessings from your elders by touching their hand to your forehead. And then also I think of my connection with my mother, my cultural heritage, of course, and significantly like eating with our hands. But they're also the gestures are incredibly expressive, and it's easy to convey a story with hands without adding context of gender, race. I paint them in black and white, and then even like class that you can tell from a full figure. I will be working in my studio from as soon as I wake up to as soon as I go to sleep. You know, like anytime, like could be from 8 a.m. all the way to 2 a.m. depending on my deadlines. And then there are periods, like I just finished 2 shows where I'm in a restorative place and I'm thinking about my next show. And so it could be like an hour a week. A lot of things happen outside of my studio when it comes to planning. Do a lot of planning, drinking coffee on our back porch. I go in, I light candles. I have an ancestor altar in my studio, which has changed the energy significantly in there. So I light a candle for mga katigulangan, my ancestors, and then I light a candle for the Diwata deities, and then I spend a couple minutes with the images of my Lola and Lolo, my grandparents, and then I'll start working. My studio space is very I protect it by not doing computer work in there at all. So I have a separate space in my kitchen for where I answer emails and do that kind of thing. What I realized with Filipinos is that we're everywhere. So, like I grew up in Helena in a Filipino community, and if there's Filipinos in Helena, there's Filipinos literally everywhere. In Missoula, I lived here for like 9 years, and I'm just starting to meet the Filipino community here. But that being said, most of the connections that I have in the diaspora are with community members in like the Bay Area, a lot in California, Florida, Virginia. My mom first spoke only Bisaya to me when I was little, and then pretty rapidly she stopped. And this was a community phenomena with other parents and their children. They stopped speaking their language to us, but then they continued to speak Tagalog amongst us. So like I grew up always listening to it. There was a point where when I was little I spoke more Bisaya than I did English. 2020 I think is when I started looking for a tutor, and I continuously take classes online for Cebuano specifically, which is the Bisaya language that my family speaks. And what I noticed when I started speaking the language and practicing the language, one, that the words came very naturally, but then also I started dreaming in Cebuano, and I started dreaming more of my family, my Lola and Lolo that have passed away. People often say that language is culture, and I asked my mom, who speaks 4 languages, what language she thinks in, and she sat there and thought about it for a while, and then she's like, I think in Cebuano. But the fact that she had to think about it means she's fluent in all these languages. But then I was also thinking, after asking that question, the effect on your brain and how you perceive the world if you're thinking in a different language, or what language you think in, affects your perception of everything, of society, of the way things look, because you're thinking in a language, you're not just having thoughts. There's a huge movement in the Filipino diaspora to reclaim identity. What I experienced as a Filipino Montanan was assimilate, forget language. Like, of course, there are like a lot of things that were unavoidable, like food. And of course, like, we want to hold on to our food because that is such a big part of the culture. But even just like paintings and decorations that we had, I remember those just slowly going away. Like a walis tambo is a traditional broom. We used to have one of those. I don't know when it disappeared. There's this famous Filipino, that Jose Rizal, that said, no history, no self. I have to like point at my head. No history, no self. And so if you don't, especially as a Filipino American, know history, then you don't know the context that you're here. And I think that it really behooves you as a person, and figuring out your path and your purpose, to understand what came before you. I remember growing up, I used to house sit my auntie's place, and her husband had a lot of Salvador Dali prints all over. And she likes to say that those definitely inspired me, which I think is true. There's a lot of local artists that definitely have inspired me, especially like out of college and like kind of entering the scene here. And like Courtney Blazon is somebody that I always think of that has inspired me to become a full-time artist and like a working artist. Figuring out really who you are and where you belong, like what your role is in whatever circles that you belong, or maybe it's like the town, maybe it's a bigger community. nationally, internationally, whatever it is significant to you, figuring out what your role is there, exterior of art, I think is really helpful in figuring out who you connect with and who your art connects with. What I really love about this show, and I think is very in line with where we are nationally and in Missoula, is that every body of work in this show is very different. There's similarities and there's flow, but what I love is the appreciation that different people have different things that are sacred to them. If I could tell Filipino kids, or what I'd like to see from Filipino kids, especially in Montana, is knowing where their family comes from, like at the very least, because there are so many different subcultures of the Philippines, and it has such a rich history, and I think that a lot of kids and just people would find spiritual healing, or just understand themselves, understand their thought processes better, knowing where they come from.